Good evening and welcome to another Chip Chat. And tonight I'm joined by Grant from Stories for Games. Say hello, Grant.
Hello, Grant. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Why did I know you were going to do that?
Yeah.
And tonight I basically wanted to sit down with Grant and discuss something that I'd made a video about a week ago, and that's exclusives. And we all know that the new consoles are coming. And when I made my video, I talked about that a little bit. And I actually came down quite hard on exclusives in my video. But what I wanted to do tonight is actually get a little bit more input, as I say, and talk about them and try and tease it apart and find pros and cons and see if exclusives ever can provide us with some positives. Are there good things that come out of exclusives as well? So if I hand it over to you, Grant, to start, do you want to give us your idea of sort of how you see exclusives being teased out? Because that's something else as well of, the different types of exclusives. And I think it's important for us to define what they are before we actually get going, because obviously they do slightly different things.
Yeah, no, that's right. So, I mean, I can sort of say how I understand it and what I think the different types of exclusives are. I mean, obviously these are kind of, taken as a given, but I mean, I think it's important, isn't it, to try and get that differentiation. So you've got what I would call a general console exclusive, where it's a good example is you pick up like a PS4 or an Xbox, and you have pictures on the backs of the exclusive games. It says only available on this console, and will never appear anywhere else. So those are like usually the first party exclusives that we're talking about there.
Yeah, so sort of platform holder exclusives, those
exactly.
kind of things. Yeah.
So you've got the platform exclusives. Obvious examples for PS4. You got things like Spider-Man and God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn. Xbox has got Forza, Halo. And the other ones. Sorry, I don't have an Xbox anymore, so I'm not doing that to diss Xbox. I just can't remember some of the exclusives.
No, I mean back in the day you had things like Fable as well.
Yes, obviously Fable. Yeah, that was an older one, wasn't it? But
hopefully, the Epic Game Store have got Guilt.
Yes,
so I think that's the second party. I don't even think that's a first party, is it? That's not a platform holder exclusive. They don't own the studio, so that would be an example of something slightly different. So.
That's the thing, and that's a good point, actually. Yeah, the first party exclusives are, they might be put out by a named studio, like Naughty Dog, but they're owned by Sony, so that's the definition and the first party exclusive in that regard. So you've also got what are called console exclusives, which means that they're only going to appear on one console, but they will also appear on PC as well. So
all of the Xbox exclusives.
Yeah, all of the Xbox ones. And also, a good example, a recent one for PS4 is obviously Death Stranding is coming out on PC, I think, next month, actually.
But that Horizon as well, Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yeah, and Horizon Zero Dawn, so those might have appeared maybe like... In the case of Death Stranding, it's about, so that was like end of last year, I think. So October, November last year, maybe. So that had about a 6 to 8 month exclusive on the console. But I mean, in Horizon's case, that came out about 3 years ago on PS4.
Yeah. So I mean, they're a bit different. You said this when we were talking on Discord, I believe, and you said Sony are a bit different in as much as they're not coming out day and date.
Yeah. That's right.
Whereas Xbox have really, hammered that home that their exclusives are going to come out, for the most part, day and date on Xbox and on PC. And there are some that don't.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, they are all coming. Generally speaking, it's the other way around. If you are getting some that are coming to PC, but not to the Xbox straight away.
That's right.
The other thing... I'm interested here, though, is because obviously we're talking about primarily first party here.
Yeah.
But then you get into the muddy area of things like third party exclusives and even the term second party exclusives and kind of what would be the difference between a third party and a second party exclusive? How would you define that? How would you see that?
Okay, so second party exclusive, right? So in that case, you've got a sort of a game studio who might take up like a development contract from a platform holder, and then they'll develop games sort of exclusive to that platform. So the way I see a second party is it's a developer who isn't owned by like a first party or a platform holder, but they make games for that first party company. So that's sort of like, I think, what they mean by second party. I mean, what you usually find though, if you've got a second party developer who makes an impression, they usually end up getting swallowed up at some point, don't they, by the first party?
Insomniac.
Yeah, Insomniac's a good example. Ninja Theory are like obviously on Xbox as well. But third party now, I'll admit I haven't written down what I would sort of like, what the definition for that might be. So,
the way I might see that as being different, and this is why I'm trying to define it for us, because I think that depending on who you talk to, they'll define it differently. Yes. The way I would see it is that a third-party exclusive might be a game that the developer just develops and then puts it out on one console. There's no deal. There's nothing.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's perhaps how I would see that. Again, other people would see it in a different way, and these definitions are fluid. But that's just the way I would maybe see it for the benefit of this particular video, if you like, podcast, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, we're starting to see those as well. I mean, I think there's examples of that on Switch, isn't there? Where you've got these indie studios putting out games on Switch. They're like third-party developers. I think there was an RPG that was released on Switch that sort of fitted that definition that you've just said. And I think it was only on Switch and PC. And I think what we were seeing that with PS4 a lot. At the beginning of this console generation, you were getting these small indie developers putting out these games on PS4 and maybe PC at a later date. But yeah, I think because Switch has obviously been a bit of a phenomenon in its own right in terms of sales, it's sort of like it's rapidly catching the PS4 actually by all accounts.
I mean, it's perfect for those kind of bite-sized games as well. The smaller developer produces a game that's 5 hours long or whatever that you can play episodically almost.
Yeah.
I think the Switch definitely lends itself to that. And I can see why certain third-party developers would look at the Switch and think, well, the outlay's not huge, get on the Switch. It's a no-brainer. I would think. I mean, I'm not a developer, but that's what I would think. I mean, I was talking to a mate of mine, and he's making a small game for iOS.
Yeah.
And some of the things he talks about, about trying to get your game out in such a way, one, that it doesn't get nicked, that people just don't nick your ideas and put out a clone. And that all those things have to be taken into account, especially for small developers. And I think, I don't know what the deal is with the Switch in terms of how you get your games on the Switch, but it must be relatively easy because you're seeing a whole boatload of these things turning up. It's almost become like the portable Steam in terms.
That's exactly it, isn't it? It's like it's getting that reputation, and I think what you said is probably true. It's probably a low barrier for entry, but also what I think, and what I mean by that is, in terms of like, maybe you don't have to jump through a lot of hoops. Like, I mean, if you think of how many hoops you had to jump through, for instance, to get like an app or a game on the Apple, on Apple's platform, on iOS. But I think with Switch is, in a way, because it's the Switch isn't a particularly powerful console. It's based on this Tegra chipset, isn't it, or something?
Yeah, the Tegra X1, I believe it is.
Yeah, so it's basically like a tablet in a lot of ways. It's like
same chip that's in the Shield, the NVIDIA Shield.
And I think it from what I gather, it's not that complicated to develop for. So it has advantages for indie developers who, they might not have a game that's like very big in scope graphically, and the Switch probably just fits it really well. They're the type of games that these indie developers want to make. It's probably ideal in that regard. But also you're seeing these older games, aren't you? Like the BioShock collection's just come out, because slightly older games that, that were running, say, on PS3 and 360. I mean, Switches will run those sort of games really smoothly. So people who didn't, who might not have been part of that console generation, get a chance to play older games on Switch, and it's like the handheld benefit as well, isn't it? Sort of.
Absolutely, and from the point of view of if we're talking about exclusives, and we're talking about the indie developers specifically here,
yeah,
it's coming from them. It would seem to me, rather than
I think so.
With some, if you look, these are almost exactly the opposite type of exclusives to the kind of exclusives we're seeing on EGS. The Epic Game Store.
Yeah.
Where Epic are going out and splashing the cash and saying, come onto our platform. And I think if you look at what's going on with the Switch, and you've got these third-party developers that are just saying, oh, I'm just going to put it on the Switch. Or, often just I'm going to put it on the Switch and the PC because they're easy to develop for, presumably, like I say, neither of us developers, but presumably they're easy to develop for because, there's so many of these things appearing. And it must be relatively easy and pain-free to do it. And I think that's perhaps something that Nintendo have done this generation that's really helped them in terms of getting games on their store. Yeah. It's a lot easier to do that now than it was in the past because it seems to me in the past it's been very, very difficult. And it is benefiting them. It's the way they filled out their third-party portfolio, if you like.
Yeah, and haven't they done a great job at completely changing sort of like their approach from the Wii U as the disaster for third party, wasn't it? Completely. And you've got the opposite, completely opposite effect with the Switch, and they know that Nintendo. They're not stupid. It's also partly, I think, that a lot of these developers they want to catch sort of like the same wave that the Switch is riding in terms of its like sales success. So they know that they're looking at an audience of like it's probably 50 million plus Switches been sold now. I think actually there is way over that. So they're getting into a platform that's like massively popular and continues to keep growing and growing. I mean, you can't bloody get hold of one by all accounts. It's really hard.
It was sold out all over the place in the States, and apparently the Switch Lite's really hard to come by now as well.
That's what I've heard as well. Yeah. So it's just going back to Nintendo again. So talking about exclusives, I think Nintendo they're quite interesting. They're sort of like I sort of see them as apart from like Microsoft and Sony because with Nintendo, obviously, I think Nintendo's consoles are one area where exclusives really, really can make a difference in selling your console. And I think with Nintendo, it has a bigger effect than maybe it would with Microsoft and Sony. I mean, I might be jumping ahead here because I'm sure you wanted to discuss that topic, but it's just something that I thought about. I think Nintendo, because people have expectations of Nintendo in terms of what properties, because of the properties they own, like Zelda and Mario, etc. If Nintendo are going to say we're going to launch with a Zelda game and we're going to have a Mario game, it's like that can genuinely build like a lot of hype for the sales.
I think definitely more so with Nintendo, as you've just said, than in either PlayStation or to a much bigger degree even Xbox. Because I talked about this in my video, that if you look at Xbox and how long Xbox has been around, it's around about 20 years. I can't remember the exact figure.
It's about 2000-ish, isn't it? I can't remember exactly when.
Yeah. So it's around about that time. I did write it down somewhere, but as I told you before we started this, I lost my notes. So I'm winging it. But if you actually look at that, the people who are out there now writing reviews who were growing up playing video games, most of the influencers, I hate that term, but most of the influencers, most of the journalists didn't grow up, didn't grow up playing Xbox. They grew up playing Nintendo and PlayStation. And maybe a bit of Sega or whatever. But that they're the console platforms that are still left from that period are Nintendo and Sony. And so from a historical perspective, their exclusives are going to be I'm not going to say that they're almost, going to just get a pass. Then they're going to be accepted more easily. But it's just that people have got certainly for Nintendo, they've got a lot of love in their hearts for Nintendo because they grew up with it.
Yeah, definitely.
And that kind of nostalgia plays into what Nintendo are selling us now. I mean, you sell a Zelda. You're not just selling a new Zelda game. You're selling all the Zelda games throughout history. And all the memories that people have got playing those games.
Absolutely.
Same with Mario.
It's like a legacy, isn't it, almost?
Yeah. Right, and so just if we can just bring it back a second, just bring it back round to move it away from Nintendo for a brief moment, and just bring it back to talk about the different types of exclusives. So we're looking at platform holders, which we've talked about in terms of Nintendo, Sony, all the rest of it. Then we've got the third and second party, which you can, as I said, we can differentiate between those in terms of second party being a deal that's done, broadly speaking, with the platform holder, whereas third party tends to be, if you've got a third party exclusive, it tends to come from the developer who've decided, often from a point of view of a third-party developer who wants to get a game out there. They've decided, right, I'm going to put it on the Switch, or I'm going to put it on the PC, or both, or maybe PlayStation, or whatever. The interesting thing there, and I think this is is part of the crux of what we're talking about, is I actually haven't got a problem with that kind of exclusive, because I know it might be annoying that a game's not going on a particular platform, but I say I haven't got a problem. I'd rather overarching. I'd rather all games were on all platforms.
Yeah, and I think we both said that, didn't we, in the comment section to your recent video? And there was a guy who was basically sort of arguing against that. I mean, I would agree with you. I would prefer if all games were on all platforms. We didn't have this kind of it's like boxing sort of a way, you're sort of kind of like console, kind of like echo chamber in a way. So you've got sort of this is our identity here. It's like it's partly a way of creating an identity. Obviously, it's branding is a huge part of it as well. So. And I don't really have a problem with I don't explicitly have a problem with like first party exclusives in and of themselves. The only thing that I have a problem with is, and I think these are the absolute bane of fucking the console kind of ecosystem. That's timed exclusives. Now, timed console exclusives, I think are the stupidest thing ever.
If we're talking about platform exclusives and exclusives that are coming from a third-party developer who just wants to get their game out there on a platform, and then you compare that to timed exclusives, they are the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. Yeah, so I can understand to some extent platform exclusives, and I can understand that they sell. I can understand that a third-party developer hasn't got necessarily the resources to put his game out on every platform. That's another thing people don't tend to take account of when talking about this sort of topic, is the fact that some companies just can't afford it, can they? Because you've got to pay a fee to put your game on, the different like PSN or the Xbox Store. I think it differs depending on. And they just may not have the resources just to do the porting.
They've got to decide what they think is the best platform for their game, and they're risking a huge amount just putting it out there because they're thinking, well, am I going to get my money back? Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah, and there's stories out there of people trying to get their games out there, and they partner with some fly-by-night company and don't see any of the money.
That happens a lot. Yeah.
Well, that's happened. I mean, you've got there's a YouTuber out there who does a series called Dirty Devs, and obviously he's talking about dirty developers, but you've got publishers out there who are taking developers for a ride and all sorts of nefarious shit going on.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, then with the caveat that I would rather not see exclusives. Period. Platform holder exclusives and sort of the exclusives that are coming from those small guys I can take. But when you start getting into what you just said just a minute ago about timed exclusives, as far as I'm concerned, they serve, certainly from a gamer's perspective, they serve no purpose. What exactly is it helping a Sony player if they've got a timed exclusive? How is that making things better for them because the Xbox players haven't got that game on their platform because Sony has done a deal? And I'm not singling out Sony here because Microsoft have done it in the past as well and continue to do it. These companies have all done it.
Yeah.
But when it twists my melon when people start defending timed exclusives and timed DLC as well. I mean, timed DLC. What the was it? Call of Duty comes out on the PlayStation. And they get the DLC early.
Yeah, they get one of the maps. Even worse, they get if you drill it down, they get one of the multiplayer maps a month before Xbox or something like that. It's stuff like that. I read that and it just makes me want to start grinding my teeth and I just think that's so petty. I mean, Sony use it as a way of kind of it's a branding and marketing thing, only available on the PS4. It's one bloody map.
Yeah. and Microsoft did it before them. They've done it as well. But it's just, it does. It really does my head in. And it's bad enough that they do it, and you can understand it from a company's point of view. Even though I detest it, I can kind of understand it. It's about driving console sales. It's about getting people on your platform and driving engagement and all the other buzzwords. What really, really twists my melon is when you've got gamers defending it.
Well, you see, the thing is as well, what sort of what a lot of gamers sometimes forget, they will defend it. That's the thing, but. There was a really interesting article a while back from Crystal Dynamics, who did I don't think they're doing them anymore. They did the Tomb Raider reboot games, and obviously they signed up for this timed console exclusive for Rise of the Tomb Raider on the Xbox One for a year, the year before PS4. And one of the developers or the studio head, he wrote this really interesting piece where he outlined why it turned out to be a really bad deal for the company. Because what they did was they accepted a lump sum, and they were quite candid about their details that they went into, which surprised me actually because I thought there might be some sort of NDA. But what they said was, well, we got a lump sum from Microsoft basically, and we thought that would help us in some degree. But what ended up happening was they got nowhere near their sales target. They ended up. I couldn't actually believe this when he said this, but the game only sold 450,000 copies on Xbox One, and that it turned out to be a disaster. And they said, the funny thing is, they said as soon as it was released on PS4, a year later, he said it did 1.5 million in the first week. And but the problem was they had all this. They were expecting a certain amount of revenue, not just from this lump sum they got from Microsoft. They were expecting this sales revenue, and they basically it hit the company's finances hard by only releasing on Xbox. He said in the end, if we'd have released on PS4, he said, with the sales that we got when we finally did, we would have ended up making a lot more money. So he said it turned out to be an absolute disaster. Signing the timed exclusive. And he said, I will never ever do it again. Basically.
That's really interesting. and wasn't there something? Well, there was Titanfall and Titanfall 2 because Titanfall came out as an Xbox exclusive.
Yeah, it did.
And talk about fans losing their shit and behaving like fools. That when Titanfall 2 came out and it wasn't an Xbox exclusive anymore.
Yeah.
Some of the Xbox fans were really annoyed.
Yeah, I bet they were.
It's just there's a reason why it's not an exclusive anymore. It's because it didn't sell that well on the Xbox.
Exactly.
And now they're going to the PlayStation because they've got, it's still coming out on the Xbox. All right. Titanfall 2 came out on the Xbox. Don't worry, don't panic. It's still coming out. You haven't lost anything.
Yeah.
But it's coming out on the PlayStation 2. What would have made that even better is if they'd had crossplay, because then you'd have been able to play with the PlayStation fans, but then they'd have moaned about that as well.
Great. Yeah.
But the thing is, and going back to what we were saying about timed DLC, which is the worst case of this as well. It's bloody worse having DLC. I'm hoping as we move into the next generation, and I want to talk about the next generation a little bit in a minute.
Yeah.
But as we move into the next generation, I'm hoping we're going to see more crossplay.
Yes.
And I'm hoping if we get more crossplay, it might put a nail. I can't see it happening, but I'm hoping, we can live in hope. I'm hoping that crossplay will shut down these kind of deals, because people aren't going to be happy if they say, oh, you've got crossplay, we're offering crossplay, oh, but you can't play that map, and you can't have those guns, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, because only those guys over there get that.
Yeah.
I mean, that will talk about splitting the player base. We're entering a world where we're getting crossplay, which is a great thing for me.
Yeah. Definitely agree. Yeah, crossplay is fantastic. It's fantastic for gamers. Because let's face it, I mean, I'm able to play Warzone with a friend of mine. He's on PS4 and I'm on PC. And as far as I can see, crossplay is a great thing. It opens up your game to more players, doesn't it?
Oh God, my lad, he's got his friends on his friends list, and I'm going to talk about a game that a lot of gamers love to hate, and it's Epic. I've just made a video about Epic and how their store's a load of shit, but.
I commented on it actually already. It's a good video.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, I think I might have answered you already. Actually, I've definitely given it a like anyway. But the Fortnite, from Epic, my lad, and I'm shameless plugging myself here today. I made a video talking about this as well and why I didn't think it worked very well, and I'm not happy with the way they've implemented it. But all that aside, Fortnite has got crossplay.
Yeah.
And crossplay with some very obvious problems, which I'm not going to go into here because it'll be a video in itself. It works pretty much. And my lad, he plays with his friends. He'll play on PC or he'll play on Xbox primarily. Sometimes he'll play on Switch. And he can play with his mates on PC. He can play with his mates on Xbox. He can play with his mates on PlayStation.
Yeah.
And they all play together.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what console they've got or whether they're playing on PC or whatever. They all play together and they all have fun together. Yeah,
and I think it's really good. I mean, especially for kids, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there, because kids want to play with their friends, and having crossplay on a game it takes away that sort of stress or sort of, because it can be because if a kid ends up feeling left out because he doesn't have the same platform as his friends, it's a big deal. So, having crossplay enabled on a game is, nothing but a positive. It's a very pro-consumer thing. And the fact that we're going to be seeing more of it, I think is brilliant. Because for too long, we've had these, multiplayer games that have been gated off. And I never really understood why.
I don't get it.
It's companies being sort of like I think, wow, they're just being bloody minded, I think, with regards to, what was Sony's excuse? Oh, we don't want. They said something that was
the PlayStation's the
marketing
best place to play.
Bollocks or something about. We don't want we can't control another the experience of another platform or something like that.
Yeah, they were talking about saving the children. Or something.
Yeah, the children are our future. Says Sony.
It was something along those lines, though, of we can't control who's on the other platforms. It's like, well, I'll tell you now, Sonny, I've got an Xbox and I've got a PlayStation, and the parental controls on the Xbox are better.
Yeah, I bet they are. Xbox generally are very good at things like that. Their whole Xbox Live setup and everything like that is just so well done. Compared to Sony's. Basically, half-assed
different league. I mean, let's my view on what's happened with the games this generation, and I think you and I are pretty much on the same page.
Yeah.
Sony's were a lot better. Newsflash, everyone.
Yeah, amazing, eh?
But Microsoft, the infrastructure and everything they've done, for the most part, there are some missteps with things like you can't use I mentioned this today as well. You can't use prepaid cards to buy backwards compatible games, which is bloody insane.
Oh, really? That's a bit weird, isn't it?
It's never worked properly right from day one. And yeah, they've never solved it.
Yeah.
But, stupid things like that aside, and let's be honest, that characterizes Microsoft quite well. Microsoft have got those things in them. They do stupid shit like that now and then.
Yeah.
But that aside, their infrastructure is really good. And I'm interested to see, actually, we're talking about crossplay and all the rest of it, and how that butts up against exclusives.
Right.
And it's not going to affect single-player games, but it will be interesting to see in the next generation, as Sony, which they seem to be doing, push more into the multiplayer stuff as well. And I know they're going to stick with their first-party exclusives that are story-based and all the rest of it, because that sells consoles and it makes them money. But they have made noises about wanting to be, more into the games as service side of things, which...
Oh, God.
But they are looking to go in that area. And, there's a reason why they're looking to go in that area. It's lucrative.
Yes,
but it'd be interesting to see if they start making money and, cross-play takes off. It'd be interesting to see if we get more and more and more games that have cross-play that aren't tending to be quite so exclusive. I mean, let's be honest, third parties don't really want to be exclusive, certainly the big ones, if they can help it, because they want to be on all the different platforms. I mean, even EA are starting to move into putting games out on the Switch now, even though...
Amazing, isn't it? It's like for years they had an issue with Nintendo, didn't they, EA? Generally.
But, they follow the money.
Yeah, they will. Oh, yeah, most definitely. You have to look at Andrew Wilson, the money robot.
Android Wilson. Yeah,
Android
absolutely.
Wilson, yeah.
Oh my God, I can't watch him anymore. I literally can't watch the guy anymore.
He's like Detroit Become Human. He's like one of the robots, isn't he?
What was that kids program where they did all the exercising and stuff? The bad guy in that. He looks just like the bad guy in that. Somebody said this. This is not my idea. Yeah. Somebody said this online ages ago, and it's true. Yeah. The more I see of him, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, and especially in that last state of play they did when he was on at the beginning, he literally looked. He was hardly even moving his. Only his mouth was moving basically because the expression was like this stone-faced, like robotic.
You have to wonder: is he having Botox in his face or something?
Yeah, it looked like
it's fixed. It's like a bloody mannequin. I don't think it's personal on the guy, but I mean, let's be honest. He can defend himself. He could probably take out a hit on me, and it's worth a fortune. He's all his billions. Not that he'd be interested in me.
I wish I hadn't. I laughed at the same time as I had a mouthful of water and now spat all over my screen.
Sorry, mate.
It's all right. Just sort of bear with me a second while I try and wipe some of it off.
Grant's gone to get his mop.
No, you can carry on. I'm like, I probably needed to clean it anyway. I'm terrible at doing that. But, yeah. We went off tangent a little bit with Android Wilson,
a little bit.
But no, EA absolutely will follow the money. That's just who they are, basically. It's what they do. I mean, all these companies do. I mean, you look at Sony's deal with Activision, that's probably... I think that's still ongoing, isn't it? And we're probably going to see it in the next generation as well.
Yeah, and that's something. While I can, say to Sony, okay, look, I can accept that your first-party exclusive serve a purpose. We've said it before. Those kind of deals, they just they make me sick.
Yeah.
And Microsoft did it before Sony, and I know we're going over the same old ground again, but it's just nonsensical. And I mentioned this in my video about this, and it's something that does really bug me. We've seen what's happening with the Epic Game Store and the exclusives that they're buying. Let's be honest, they're buying them. There's no. It's not to do with you mentioned earlier about Nintendo.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Nintendo, their first party, certainly their first party exclusives, they're intrinsically linked to Nintendo. Several of the PlayStation exclusives are intrinsically linked to PlayStation. Same with Microsoft to a lesser degree because of the historical reasons we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But if you look at what's going on with the Epic Game Store, those exclusives are nothing to do with their legacy. They're nothing to do with the feel of that platform. It's all to do with creating market share.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Epic are trying to grab as much market share as they can. So what they've got all this Fortnite money, so they can afford, like you say, to give lump sums to like companies. I think they gave a lump sum to Remedy so that they got the PC platform exclusive for Control. And also they're giving these indie developers a better deal compared to Steam, aren't they? Like 18% instead of like 30%, whatever Steam take.
But I said, I said this in my video today. They're not doing that out of the kindness of their heart. They're not doing it for the reasons that we're being told that, we're trying to help out developers. They're doing it because they're establishing market share. That's it.
Yeah, but they're doing it in such a way so that it looks like it's a very pro-developer move for them, doesn't it? It makes them look good in the public's eyes because they can sort of pretend it's for philanthropic reasons when really, like you say, they are trying to grab market share from Steam. I was going to say, I've worked out why it's called the Epic Game Store, because you have to go on an epic journey to actually purchase a product, because they haven't got an actual shopping cart. So, even
more of an epic journey to get a bloody refund.
Yeah. Oh God help you I tried to get a refund off Steam. Was it for the first time like a while ago? And they have this. If you've played a game less than 2 hours, you can supposedly get a refund. So I had this issue with Fallout New Vegas, and I still have this issue. I bought it, and I just can't get it to run on my PC. And I said this in my refund with Steam, but the only problem was that Steam pointed out is because it was over 30 days. I didn't realise you had to do it within 30 days as well. So, Steam have a very clear, what I'm saying is they have a very clear refund policy, and they have very clear agreements. Epic just haven't, it's like it's an epically bad store, basically. The way it's laid out, everything about it is just terrible. In that regard.
The whole thing with them with exclusives, and look, they have got some actual games that they make. Let's be honest, that all their money comes from Fortnite. So fine, that's on the Epic Game Store. Again, I'd rather it was across the board, but I haven't got such an issue with that. But when they're spending money to just get games on there as timed exclusives, or to make them, I don't know if there's any of them on there as a permanent exclusive. I think they're all timed exclusives.
Yeah, I think they are, actually.
But all it's doing is and I've talked about this before, withheld content.
Yeah.
It's withheld content. They're forcing the developer to withhold the content from another store. It's anti-competitive.
Absolutely right, yeah.
And my worry is, as we move forward, we're going into the streaming services and stuff.
Yeah.
My worry is we're going to see more of these types of deals.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about that, actually.
You imagine what happens when we see Stadia. Because Stadia, if you look at their games, I joked about it earlier on, they've got one exclusive. It's a fantasy game that no one's really heard of called Guilt. That's their one exclusive, I believe. They might have one or two more now, I don't know.
What's it called again?
Guilt, Gylt.
Oh,
and from all accounts, it's not a bad game, but it's, whatever.
Yeah.
But they have no first-party exclusives, and they're not going to have any first-party exclusives for the foreseeable future. The only way they're going to establish market share is by buying games in.
Yeah.
And then you get the very real possibility of the only way you're going to be able to play, I don't know, the next game from the Quantum Break guys,
Remedy.
Control guys, Remedy.
Yeah.
Say they do a deal with Stadia. The only way you're going to get to play that game is if you subscribe to Stadia. And then we get into a situation where Amazon join the fray.
Yeah, that's right. They finally have put out a game they've just punted that game out, haven't they? Without any publicity recently.
Yeah, just kind of came out of Yeah,
Yeah.
one of
That's the
their
one I
artists
was.
is
That's the
someone-
one I was told about at my friend's wedding 2 years ago, and that I'm pretty sure because he said it was like an MMO like experience. So I'm sure it's the. But when I looked at it, I thought it reminded me a bit of a cross between something like Destiny and Monster Hunter World. So you've got but with this PvP arena battles going on, and I mean, Amazon could potentially, we've spoken about this before, be a big player here. I mean, they've got all the resources to be.
Well, they've already got Twitch, haven't they, as well?
Yeah.
So they're already set up for all that integration.
That's right, and you've got Google, could well put the resources into Stadia in order to try and make it some sort of like viable platform. But like you say, they have to have something which differentiates them. We don't. I think we know. Well, not everybody does, but exclusives don't necessarily equate to X number of console sales. But what they do is they create. They give like a platform an identity so they're known for certain types of games, and they're also kind of like I mean, they are a branding exercise in themselves. They will create sort of discussion around that console. It's kind of like indirectly they sell a console, I think. But
absolutely, I mean, back in the day, are you for Sonic or are you for Mario?
I was thinking about that before we started. Actually, that they were prime examples of first party games that genuinely would shift huge amounts of consoles. But then it was a different environment. What you've got now is it's not like one game will necessarily push a console. Well, actually, sadly enough, the platform that runs Call of Duty the best is probably the one that will sell more.
Absolutely.
It's like what how well will the next Call of Duty game run on PS5 or Xbox, and what's the cost of each console? The cost of a console, whether it's got like the big games like FIFA and because I think early in the early life of a console, the first sort of like year, you tend to see like the sports games actually are the ones where they were like an outlier in the sense that they're good at sort of as a way of gauging how well a console will run sort of particular games. Are they graphically an improvement on the previous gen? But also they they're sort of they tend to be the games that come out the earliest as well. Because a lot of these other games take years sometimes, don't they?
Because that's things like FIFA are basically the same game every year. That's why they don't really do much. Somebody was saying, I think somebody was talking about Madden. I think it was Angry Joe. Oh, shouldn't mention Angry Joe. There's a lot of
he's in a bit of trouble, isn't he?
At the moment. But he was saying, that basically Madden hasn't changed for 7 years or something. I don't know. I don't play Madden, but similar thing with FIFA.
Yeah.
I keep talking about my own videos today, but I made a video, you remember this, I made a video like 3 years ago talking about how I felt that FIFA, they'd stopped really developing it because they're focused only on the money, the Ultimate Team, and that's where all their development and all their energy goes. Ultimate Team, Ultimate Team, Ultimate Team. It's not a surprise because it makes billions.
It does. I mean, somebody joked about how career mode hadn't changed in like 5 years, and they proved that they'd almost the FIFA developers had almost cut and pasted the same text like year on year into like the career mode for like when you become a manager or something. And then in one of them it had a spelling mistake that they hadn't removed, so they knew it sort of was just a cut and paste job because they hadn't even bothered to check. For like 5 years running, it was just the same thing. Because like you say, all their efforts. The only way you see like genuine evolution in FIFA is in the Ultimate Team mode because they know that's what the huge majority of people buy it for.
Yeah.
I mean, I stopped buying FIFA. I think 17 was the last one I bought and I used to play a lot with my friend Simon, but neither of us have played it since because it's crap. It's very cynical. I played a bit of PES as well. Which has its pluses and minuses, but it's genuinely it's not it's not like FIFA. I mean, Konami they're not particularly great developer, but they're nothing like EA. Yeah,
It comes to something when Konami looked like the good guy.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the thing is, like, if you think about the people that buy, say, 2 or 3 games a year, the people that buy the FIFA or the sports games and Call of Duty, they're the people that are going to buy the console, a new console, if they can run those games in a decent manner on a new console. It's like that's sadly enough, that's where the majority of the sales are going to go. I think what Exclusive do is they are very good at sort of like defining a generation for each platform holder. If you think about what we spoke about earlier, where PlayStation sort of have like become known for narrative story-driven games that are kind of epic in scope, and Microsoft know they've kind of lost a bit of focus when it comes to exclusives, but they are much better at multiplayer experiences. That goes without saying. And what's interesting, I think, is like when Sean Layden left, I think the reason why he was replaced was because I think Sony are going to shift gears a bit, much more into multiplayer rather than just dabble. I think they want to go quite heavily into multiplayer for this coming gen.
I think that you're probably right, and that will be very interesting to see what happens, because Sean Layden for me was somebody who really was pushing those kind of deep narrative-driven type of stories. I think it wouldn't have only been him, but I think he was a driving force in that area. And he's come out this week and said, we were talking about it on Twitter earlier, about how he wants to see the 10-15 hour game returning. But the interesting thing for me is if Sony are going to do this, and I think it's about getting the balance right, because I think we've talked before about Sony maybe shifting gears slightly more towards the multiplayer, whereas Microsoft are almost kind of going to go in the other direction, maybe, and they're going to look to some of their old, platform holder games, if you like, their first party games, like Fable is pretty strong rumor now. It's almost inevitable that's going to appear.
Yeah, wasn't
and
it?
They're looking to reboot Halo,
Yeah, someone said that Playground Games they thought were working on the Fable reboot. The people that do the Forza Horizon, I think they do. But because they've split their team in two. That's why the rumor is sort of persisting that Fable's going to get a reboot, and I can see it. I can see it happening. I really can. Yeah. But what I think is interesting, something I just thought of with regards to what Sean Layden was saying. Now, the 10 to 15 hour experience, I think that's kind of like what maybe the previous generation was known for, because you had more linear games sort of back. I think open world games are kind of from 2014 onwards, they sort of took over a bit. But before that, I think it was these linear 10 to 15 hour experiences. But I can actually see Microsoft maybe being known for those in the coming generation a little bit more than Sony.
I could see Microsoft certainly going down that route with Game Pass. I think that it's a ready-made platform for it, because Sony aren't doing this thing with day and date. We've talked about this before.
Yeah,
Sony aren't doing the thing with day and date, but Microsoft are. So they could be putting out games that are those kind of narrative type games. They don't necessarily have to get the same level of sales that they'd be getting, if they're looking for a big AAA blockbuster type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it that could be quite exciting in terms of moving forward, that we could be seeing a return of those kind of games. And I don't know whether that will be the case, whether they would be exclusives, Microsoft exclusives. I would imagine they would be. But that's an interesting thing for me, is if they're both rebalancing and they're both looking to go, to add to their portfolio, so they're going to be competing more directly with each other in that sense. You're going to have more narrative games from Microsoft, more open world type of those games.
Those. Oh god, I'm so sick of them. But I think what you're saying about balancing is important, because don't get me wrong. I think even though Sony might be pushing more towards multiplayer, they're not going to shoot themselves in the foot and like stop making narrative-based games. I think, like you say, there's going to be more of a kind of like a sort of trade-off between the two almost. But I think you're right in the sense we could see a direct competition in the sense that Microsoft might, because we don't know what a lot of these studios are working on that they bought.
No, we
and
don't.
We're bound to get some announcements like within the next 6 to 12 months from like some of them at least. But what I think is interesting,
I would imagine we'll hear something in July.
Oh,
I would
yeah.
be very surprised if we don't hear. If we don't hear anything in July, I will despair.
But,
because Microsoft needs to pull their finger out games-wise. They need to do something.
They definitely do. I mean, but what I think was interesting, I mean, this rumour about this 199 Xbox, I mean, I don't know whether that's going to happen, but I mean, if it does, it'll be really interesting for the console
I mean,
space.
that would be mind-boggling in terms of their market penetration, because you go into the store and there's a $200 console there that is next gen. And that's pretty much unheard of.
I mean, I was trying to think, and I bought a Wii at launch in the UK in like 2006 or 7, I think. Well, I think it was 2007. That was 199. Well, it was a little bit less than that, I think, what I paid. But that's the last console I can think of that would be sold for like under $200 or £200. So, if Microsoft start putting out a console, because obviously there might be a range, because we're expecting to see more powerful ones, obviously with Series X going all the way up. But if we see like Microsoft giving people the option with this like lower end Xbox, and then so before that you see them announce a slew of these new sort of games that like a new properties basically. In some cases, it's obviously there's bound to be some new IPs they want to push out. I'll look at it evenly. I mean, I'm not necessarily going to just buy a PS5 next gen. If the Xbox, if Xbox sort of like start putting some games out that are genuinely interesting from sort of like the type of games I want to play, I'll seriously look at getting an Xbox instead of a PS5, because I'm not in a position to buy both. So, I'll look at it as if it's like a blank canvas with each generation.
Absolutely.
I don't feel an affiliation necessarily to Sony. It's just that's what it happened to be in the last two gens.
Yeah, well, you were more of a 360 player than you were a PS3 player, weren't you?
I was an Xbox. Yeah, well, initially I had a 360 early on, and for the first few years, and I was previous to that I was an Xbox player as well. So, yeah, it'd be interesting.
The question that comes out. Sorry, go on.
No, I know it'd be really interesting. I really hope that there's like, you have this genuine choice. It's like they're both offering something like interesting for like each type of player. I think the problem was with this gen was that Microsoft shot themselves in the foot and then ballsed it up, with their crappy presentation and like not pushing it as a games console.
Shot themselves in the foot and then stood on the wound. Yeah,
hobbled around and then shot themselves in the other foot and fell over. And there was like, so when I went into the store, it was like there wasn't a choice. It was obvious what I was going to buy. Didn't even think about the Xbox, And I want to be in a position where it's a genuine choice that matters, because each one of them is offering something that covers like a multitude of different types of game. And I think that's genuinely good for everybody, especially for gamers.
That's going to be really interesting to watch, and it brings me back to the issue of exclusives, because we're obviously going to see Sony going down that route again. They're going to be, we've said that they're going to balance it out somewhat. They're already looking to go more with the live service type of model thing, but they're not, as you've already said, they're not going to drop their marquee products, if you like. Those things do give them an identity, and they do create fans. Even if they don't sell,
absolutely.
They don't make as much money as FIFA and Call of Duty. They make fans. That's what I hate the term hardcore, but that's what the more hardcore gamers are going to be interested in. And they're the people, to some degree, who market it to the other people out there in the
Well,
world.
this is it, isn't it? Because like that's a very good point. They create fans, and these fans are sometimes the ones who like will cosplay and they'll advertise the characters for Sony, and it creates this whole sort of like sub industry, doesn't it, around this game? It's almost like it's similar to like a comic book. People that used to be obsessed with collecting comic books or toys or everything. It's become like this. It's like almost like a spider's web where these things, these offshoots, are created. From this intellectual property that
gaming isn't part of the ghetto, if you like, anymore.
No.
This I saw this. I watched this happen with science fiction, where science fiction went from me sitting there reading it and trying to pretend that I was reading something else, through to now being a mainstream part of our culture, and it's happened a lot more rapidly with gaming. But gaming isn't a ghetto anymore. Gaming isn't a pastime for sad little tossers sitting in their bedrooms like you and me when we were kids.
Yeah. Yes, sat in front of my Atari ST, or like actually no, it was an Amstrad before that. Fucking hell.
Exactly.
That's not something you advertise.
No. Shh, don't tell people. You'll be ostracised.
What a cheapskate! Can't even afford a Commodore.
But it is mainstream now, whether people like it or not. And the thing is, once it becomes mainstream, this is some of the reason why we get all this tension between, the hardcore and all the other gamers, which I hate to tell you this, hardcore gamers, but they're the majority.
Yeah.
By some considerable margin, We're not, you and me and all the other people who talk about games incessantly and all the rest of it. We're not the mainstream in that sense. We're a minority within that mainstream thing.
Most definitely, yeah. I think that's generally accepted. Although these people sort of like these obsessive, like hardcore, want to think they're the most important. I can play Dark Souls without dying. Sort of like they are in the tiniest minority of obsessive.
I can watch someone playing Dark Souls without dying.
Yeah, me too. Yes. Oh, look, there's someone who's much better at games than me. Yeah. In other news, the Earth is round. Yeah. It's like I've long ago accepted that I'm not ever going to be. But that's not why I play games. There are some people, and I've talked to them on Twitter who genuinely love the challenge of playing like games that are like really tough. But
they'll get older.
Yeah, they're a small amount. They're like 0.1% or whatever. I don't know.
My mate is a bit like that. He lives for that side of things.
Yeah.
He's not really bothered about the narrative, really.
No.
He likes a good narrative. He's a comic reader, so he loves a good story,
Yeah.
But for games, he looks to games for another reason. He gets his narrative hit from somewhere else, not really from games.
Fair enough.
Which is probably more sensible than you and me, actually, because there are better narratives in all sorts of different...
Oh, yeah. That's kind of like... one of the things I wanted was like a motive behind my channel is eventually when I start sort of actually putting videos out there, was to talk about how literature, movies, TV are like, and how they cross over in the sense that they influence each other, and I think what we're starting to see games, aren't we? That I think games are getting better at sort of not relying on referring to like movies and TV so much. Obviously they still do. Or if you look at like narrative-based games, they tend to like heavily influenced by movies, which is fine because video games are still relatively young. But I think what we're starting to see, and probably we'll see the start of it in the next gen, is games becoming a lot more confident about how they express stories in through the medium, so that they're more independent of. Other mediums. So they might reference them, obviously, to a certain extent. But I think gaming is starting to become a lot more confident about how it tells stories and, compared to like other bits of literature and movies. And that's good.
Well, this is why I kind of hold out hope a little bit for things like Game Pass. And I know a lot of people don't like these services, but I see games as services a bit different to actual gaming services, if you see what I mean.
There is
the different things.
Yeah, definitely.
Things like Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Now, Nvidia with their streaming service, and you've got a crossover between streaming and the kind of buy your game and download it kind of thing, which Microsoft are doing, and Sony are doing as well to some degree. There's going to be crossover with that, where Microsoft are going to be offering streaming as well. Sony have already moved into allowing you to download some of their games, so you've got that option. This is where I think Stadia are getting it wrong. I think Stadia need to have other options. But, and I know some people disagree with me on that, but that's my view. I think if you look at that, we've already talked about the potential of Microsoft producing some more kind of exclusives that are aimed at Game Pass. I do think, and Phil Spencer said this, and you have to be a bit careful because obviously he's the head honcho at Xbox and he wants to sell stuff, and he's a bit, he comes out with corporate speak. He talks about things like cadence. I half the time don't know what he means. But when he talks about things like he wants the variation of experience,
right?
I do think he's genuine. Whether he actually ends up delivering, I don't know, but I do think he's genuine.
I think he is genuine. I mean, what you got to sort of remember is he knows what's being developed, but he can only say so much. But I think he was very conscious of the fact that Microsoft was playing catch up. So I'm sure he wants this gen to put Microsoft in the position where, even if, so these games are going on Game Pass. I think initially there was this sort of concern, and I had it myself, that Game Pass would dilute the sort of like value of a game. But I think it depends, and I think it depends on the experience. And for all we know, it might be like a really good. It might be better, obviously, for some developers than others, but I think having a variety of games and putting them on a service like Game Pass is only ever a good thing. I mean, Microsoft are very pro-consumer, and Game Pass, I think, has been a great success for them. I think it genuinely has, but it's also allowed them to differentiate themselves from Sony more, Sony and Nintendo, by having this service, because let's face it, it's a killer service for them. It's made PlayStation now look like a joke in comparison.
Yeah, I think the big difference for me, no longer the price, because Sony have seen sense and reduced the price. But I think the big thing for me, and we mentioned this earlier, is that day and date thing with Microsoft. Now, I know a lot of people don't like that.
Yeah.
But I do think that offers options. It basically opens up the service, and it gives people a reason not to go out and buy the game. They can just dip in and try games, and Microsoft are marketing it like that.
Yeah.
So it gives them the opportunity to have all these studios make more games. Now, I saw someone the other day, I made a video about this as well. There I go again. Talking about, they're going to have all these exclusives, AAA games that will come out. I don't see that happening. I see maybe, you look at Sony, they're putting out more exclusives than Microsoft, but how many actual top class exclusives they put out a year? 2, 3, something like that.
If that, some years you might only get one at best.
Exactly.
It's not actually a huge amount when you look at it over the console's lifespan. People say it's like, Sony put out all these exclusives. Well, yeah, they have, but it's not a massive difference. But the thing is, the games they have put out have been, obviously have created a lot of buzz because of the quality as well.
That's the thing. If Microsoft could do that, if they could match Sony stride for stride and put out the same kind of number, 2 or 3 a year, very high quality exclusives on Xbox Game Pass, that's a big deal. That changes things, and so that actually brings me back to asking, a question about this. In the past, we talked about the marquee titles and all the rest of it, and they sell systems and stuff. And we're in a slightly different world now.
Yeah.
They don't sell systems in the same way as they did. You mentioned this earlier, that you've got Call of Duty, you've got FIFA, God help us. And people go out and buy a console to have those and show off what these consoles can do.
Yeah.
So, given that, are we actually seeing the start of a change in the way console exclusives are used? I know we're certainly seeing that from Microsoft, but do you think we're seeing discount Nintendo because they're a whole world unto themselves.
Yeah.
But do you think that exclusives are going to kind of morph and change to fit with these new delivery systems and the way the way we're going to be consuming games moving forward? Because we are going to be consuming games through services that we subscribe to, and increasingly it's going to be through streaming as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know where exclusives fall in that. How do you see this panning out as we move forward?
Well, obviously with this gen, we've seen Sony follow a sort of traditional exclusive model, well, pretty much the same one they followed in the PS3 generation, which is to put out an exclusive that they hope will create buzz and sell a certain amount of consoles. And quite often they would box. I think later on in the console generation, they tend to box these exclusives in, don't they, with consoles as a way of trying to shift them. But I think Sony are acutely aware of the fact that the gaming environment is evolving, and it's evolving because of companies like Microsoft putting services like Game Pass into the equation. And what that does is it changes the way people play games. It changes the way people own games, and it changes the value of the game. And so what you're seeing is, the gaming experience is not the same, is not going to be the same as it was in previous generations, where people put a disc in the machine and they play the game. Because for a start, we're moving into pretty much an all digital environment. We're going to go that way.
Absolutely.
Obviously, there's still going to be disc-based media, so you're still going to have people giving people the option to buy the game on disc if they want to.
I'll predict that if it's not dead, it will be, on life support by the end of this next gen.
Yeah, and Sony know that because they put out 2 versions of the PS5, or they are going to be. And they wouldn't have done that if they couldn't see, the way that gaming is evolving in that regard. But what I think they're also doing is they know they can't be left behind if gaming moves in a direction where people don't necessarily have to own the game outright. They, if they're going to be playing it through Game Pass, then, and that's how they want to experience the game, then Sony are going to want a slice of that as well. So we might see that having an effect on exclusives. We're already seeing Sony toying with, experimenting with putting their games out on PC. I think that is going to become more of a factor as well moving forward.
I do. I think where I feel more strongly about this than you do, actually. I think we're going to see. Well, it depends on the way the market goes, but I think we are likely to see Sony do it more, especially if these games sell well.
It's possible. Yeah, I don't discount that. I think it's possible. Yeah,
because
why not?
we're moving into this thing where you can play your games across the board, and Sony, people say Sony are lagging behind, and they are in many respects, certainly in terms of perception. But I subscribed recently, a couple of months back, because I'm trying to put together a video talking about the streaming services.
Yeah,
it's taken me a lot longer than anticipated, especially now The Last of Us 2's out, because I'm playing that all the time.
Yeah,
but when I look at Sony, and I was looking at it on the PC the other day, a lot of these games, okay, it's through streaming, but a lot of these games are available on PC now, through their streaming service. So Sony aren't resting on their laurels here.
No.
The thing for me, though, is we've seen the characteristics of exclusives change over time. As the platforms change, as we've got different people providing different games and stuff. I mean, it's interesting to see what happened in the early days of the Xbox, where a lot of people talked about it as being the Dreamcast 2 because it had a lot of the games that would have been on the Dreamcast because they did this deal with Sega.
Yeah, it very much was almost a spiritual successor to Dreamcast. I think that's probably why I bought into it as well, because I did like the Dreamcast.
I never owned a Dreamcast, and I still want one.
Yeah, it was a love-hate thing with the Dreamcast for me, because in some ways it was like almost a sort of like a test bed for like how future gaming would evolve, because Microsoft put their operating system on the Dreamcast. It was Windows CE.
Windows CE, yeah. I was watching a documentary about it the other day, actually.
So you had a built-in modem as well. So Dreamcast was sort of like anticipating this development into like multiplayer and things like that. So and the Xbox just took that one stage further. Which was quite interesting. But I think you're right. I mean, in the sense that we could see Sony. I think the way Sony see the PC platform is quite interesting because I think that's changed as well, and that's what's sort of made them willing to put out like their first party exclusives out on PC, albeit 3 years later. But what I think we'll see that gap start to shrink.
Yeah,
and
I
think,
do.
And I think we might well see that it goes from 3 years to 2 or maybe even 1.
Careful,
I
Grant.
can
There's
see
a lot
that.
of Sony PlayStation fans out there getting their torches out and their pitchforks.
Yeah, they will be. Yeah, but what's quite interesting, something that I learned recently, was that Sony have actually started publishing games on PC directly. Through almost through an intermediary sort of like developer, but that's interesting as well.
Yeah,
so they're putting games out on PC. So the environment, a lot of these companies are realizing they have to evolve as the market evolves. It's just it's like how you survive, and how
this
you
is
thrive.
the thing, and this is why I think that we are going to see, one way or another, we're going to see a change in the way exclusives work.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's because of necessity. Microsoft have seen the writing on the wall, and I'm pretty certain that Sony have as well. They know that consoles aren't the big thing moving forward. Yeah. And they're not. I hate to tell you this, console fans, but they're not.
Your box is not that important anymore.
It's not. And it's going to become less and less and less important as time goes on. I'm not predicting the demise of the console. I think that people overate the pudding with that some years ago and said the console was dead. I don't think the console's dying. I don't think it's going to go away.
No.
I quite believe that we could see a next gen Xbox after this coming generation. Same with PlayStation, same with Nintendo. I think we could see, and maybe even other people joining the fray.
Yeah.
But as we move more and more into streaming and digital downloads and all the rest of it, the console's going to become less and less and less important. And so exclusives, along with everything else, are going to have to evolve to fit that market. Because as much as people want to hold on to the past, the idea of physical games, along with physical music and physical films, I still buy films on disc and I still buy music on disc.
Yeah.
But most people don't. I know you don't buy music on disc, you buy it all digitally.
No, I don't anymore. I haven't, because I don't have a means of playing it as much as anything.
No.
I bought digital for a long time now. I can't remember exactly how long, but yeah, that's how my own shopping habits have evolved. I don't have a drive in my PC. I haven't had one for years.
No, I've got a couple of plug-in ones that I use every so often when I want to,
Actually, I do have an external, but I just very rarely plug it in.
So going back to the thing of exclusives, the thing for me is we're going to see, obviously, as the console becomes less important, and in the broad scheme of things, it's not very important already. I hate to tell you this again, console gamers, but it's not.
No.
As we move away from the console being as important and we move more towards services and all the rest of it, which we said this already, it's inevitable, it's going to happen, and people can get up in arms as much as they like. You can't stop the inevitable. It's like standing and shouting in front of a tsunami. You're not going to change it. Console exclusives are going to be less and less important. So you can see why Sony may be looking at the PC and other areas. And you can see why Microsoft have already moved heavily into, let's get our games on PC, let's get our games anywhere else, within reason. So console exclusives are going to become less important. But are some form of exclusive still going to be important? Like, are Sony going to move towards Microsoft's way of doing things and look at using their exclusives to sell their services a bit more?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, they quite possibly, I think Sony are looking very, very carefully at how Game Pass is gaining market share, and this idea that Microsoft are basically saying we are not looking for this exclusive to sell or do this amount of numbers. So already it's changing because they're saying things like, oh, this amount of players were playing the game through Game Pass.
Yeah.
It's no longer this game has sold X number of copies. I mean, Sony was still making that part of the discussion with, obviously, this gen. They're saying, like, Horizon Zero Dawn sold 13 million, Spider-Man sold this. But I think they will inevitably move towards maybe a similar way of, like, gauging how exclusives are having an effect on consoles. It's not necessarily, like you say, that they're going to keep sort of like making the discussion about sales numbers, because they've seen already Microsoft have moved that discussion away themselves, because by very nature, if you putting something through a service, it's not like this, you can't evaluate it the same way.
Yeah.
But Sony might well, create or evolve PlayStation Now to sort of make it a direct rival to Game Pass, because they're seeing that people are playing games differently. It's like we're saying, and I think I think to a certain extent we're still going to see in the next generation Sony saying selling consoles and selling exclusives in a sort of like traditional way, and they'll have sales expectations attached to them. But I still think that the way Microsoft have changed the equation with Game Pass is quite significant. And I think some people haven't grasped how significant it is. And what Microsoft have looked at, they've looked at Netflix, and they've seen Netflix has completely changed the way people consume, like films and TV. Netflix, Amazon Prime, it's basically killed off video rental stores. I mean, they were going to die anyway because of deaf physical
bloody
media,
hell! We've got Sky, and we hardly watch Sky. I mean, I mainly watched Sky for sport, and obviously there's not much sport on at the moment. It's coming back now, but so we watch Amazon Prime, and we watch Netflix, and every so often we'll watch Sky Atlantic when Game of Thrones or something like that was on it. But for the most part, we don't tend to watch normal telly anymore. We watch Prime and Netflix. That's what we watch.
Yeah, I don't own a TV, so I only watch Netflix. I've got a Netflix subscription, and gaming has gone that way. I think in a way the PC, Steam, the invention of Steam was quite significant in lots of ways, because I think Steam was like the very first kind of platform. It was the first all digital platform on PC, and it was a roaring
it's changed
success.
everything. I mean,
it was a complete success. It was like it changed the way PC players consume games, and I think obviously a lot of these console companies, they obviously couldn't ignore the impact of something like Steam. I think it's a natural evolution. Game Pass may well be the de facto standard for how we play and consume games going forward, and therefore it will change the way we both look at exclusives and the way companies evaluate the importance of exclusives as well. It's it's very interesting, I think.
I do. I'd be interesting to watch and see what happens. My only concern. I've got a few concerns, but one of my big concerns, and this isn't necessarily specifically to exclusives, although I think it could have a disproportionate effect on exclusives.
Yeah,
and that's the sense that if you look at what's happened with music, not so much with films, because you still have to watch a film all the way through. You still, pretty much have to watch a series all the way through. But with music, it really has changed the way people consume music, and they dip in and out, and they have playlists, and they don't listen to albums and all the rest of it. It's a very different way of consuming. And I'm worried about that with gaming. And I know I have a tendency to do this anyway, of dipping in and out of games coming back to it later or intending to come back to it later and not because, shiny and new, and I move on to the next one and have a look. And I get bored. This is why I don't like these big open world games, because I very rarely finish them. And I think we talked about the stats before. Very few people ever finish them.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah, definitely.
My worry is that games will be devalued in some way by this.
I think that's a legitimate concern. And to be honest, when I think Game Pass, I think I did a video on Game Pass, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the video, but one of my early concerns when I looked at something like Game Pass was the very same thing you've just mentioned. Will it devalue a game to the extent where if you put a game out on Game Pass, every Xbox exclusive goes on Game Pass, and obviously other games go on as well. And it'd be interesting to see what companies that decide to put their games on Game Pass, like these indie developers. It'd be interesting to hear what their experience of putting their game on Game Pass has been for them, and whether they think it devalues their game, because it's a legitimate concern in what you've just said. I think, we can't ignore that as an issue, because it's all very well changing the way we consume games, but it's got to work for the people that are making them as well. Obviously. Absolutely. Because if it's not going to work for them, then it's all very well being pro-consumer, but we could end up with less and less companies willing to put their games on Game Pass if they think that is a concern, for their revenue, first and foremost.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here's my nightmare scenario then. I'll give you my nightmare scenario of how I can see this panning out in relation to exclusives in its worst way. And that is that with these new services, we see more and more games that aren't of the same quality that we're currently seeing, especially from Sony, and the odd game here and there from Microsoft as well. And they get watered down because people aren't playing games in the same way. So on the one hand, we've got that. We could see those sort of games getting watered down. We get fewer of them as people also move away with their tastes, because more and more people are playing these games as service and all the rest of it. And we already know that's happening.
Yeah, it is.
As that's happening as well, though, we're going to be seeing the fragmentation of the market as we get more and more companies coming into the market. So instead of Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, with the odd one others here and there, we're also going to see Stadia might grow if a miracle happens. Amazon could come into the fray. I think that's a very real possibility. Apple extend their gaming area, and we get the gaming market fragments, and exclusives are bought in. A lot of exclusives are bought. Play this game on our system. So you have to have a PlayStation or PlayStation Now or Game Pass, or you have to have the Epic Game Store or Stadia just to play certain games.
Yeah.
And so it becomes more and more difficult to get what you... And we're already seeing this in TV. This is what's happening in TV now. There's something, especially in America, it's not quite so bad over here, but in America, it's so fragmented with so many different services. In order to watch a particular program, you have to subscribe to a particular service, and it gets
with
ridiculous.
America, it's even worse, isn't it? Like HBO, and then you've got that,
sorry, go on.
No, it's very fragmented. That is what you're saying is legitimate. Is a really big concern. We don't want the gaming market to become fragmented. Just to sort of to use a personal example of just from my own experience. So I was having problems with Xbox Game Pass. I basically just can't get it to install on my PC, so I cancelled my subscription. And just by cancelling my subscription, it's changed the way that obviously I consume games. So for a little while, I didn't play anything, but I've gone back to sort of buying individual games again, and it's made me think about the difference between buying an individual game and then having a plethora of all these different games that you can, like you say, dip in and out of through Game Pass. And the danger is that it creates some sort of attention deficit disorder where you can only play games for a couple of hours at a time because it's having the same effect, like you say, that maybe using a music service like Spotify is. You create all these playlists, for music, because people are only they're not listening to full albums necessarily anymore, and it's the same thing happening through these services like Game Pass. They're not finishing the game necessarily because there's so many other games they can play.
Yeah.
And from my own experience, just stopping a Game Pass subscription, I bought Resident Evil 3 remake the other day, and it's like I'm going to sit down and play a game through to the end, and it's interesting how quickly you shift in your way of consuming games. So it is legitimate. It's important you flag up these things because it will have an effect on the way people consume games. Definitely.
Yep, absolutely. And last thing, I'm going to just finish off with this one. Here's my more positive scenario, my golden pastures, if you like.
Yeah.
The flip side of it, and I don't believe that we'll see this for a minute, is that, we see Microsoft making more first-party games that are, narrative-driven. We see these great narrative-type games coming from them, and Sony carry on doing this. And that we get cross-play on the multi-plats, and so all the games end up being multi-plat, and all these different services interconnect with one another. Because that's the other interesting thing: how are they going to interconnect with one another? Because we've seen the sort of start of cross-play, but how is it going to work as we move forward?
Yeah.
And so we see cross-play, we get more first-party exclusives that are high quality. And everyone's happy, and everything's in the garden is rosy, and we don't get these timed exclusives because they won't work with the with the crossplay thing. So everything turns out to be way better.
Gaming utopia has arrived. Everyone.
Yeah. So, I mean, for my money, the scenario that I pictured first is the most likely one. And I think the second one is almost impossible. I don't think that's going to happen. With a bit of luck,
it's pretty unlikely. That's pretty unlikely, yeah.
With a bit of luck, we might see a little bit of that creeping into it, though. And we could see Microsoft producing a few more decent quality exclusives.
I think they will. I think they will. I mean, how many? I don't think it's going to be a huge amount. I mean, you're getting some gaming commentators being very pessimistic and saying it's going to be exactly the same as it was last generation for Microsoft, and I don't believe that for a second.
Well, I hope not,
because they bought all these developers. I mean, what are they going to do? Just like make them do Minecraft clones all day long? I don't think.
Well, this one's working on the UI, and this one's working on the avatars. And this...
Yeah. No, don't EA make their studios do that? I heard one developer say that a lot of their studios were forced to spend time using Frostbite or learning how it works or something.
Yeah, because they're trying to push for every single game they make to be on the Frostbite engine.
Yeah, that's right.
Regardless of what type of game it is, because it's not suited to different types of games. Oh, for God's sake.
No, but this one developer who used to work for them, he's this Australian guy. It's quite interesting. He's got this channel where he looked at the the Sony conference, like when they were doing the technical stuff for the PS5, and he breaks it down for you and how his understanding of it. But he said that when he worked at EA, he was put directly on learning how to use Frostbite, and he said it's almost like part of the brainwashing or something. I don't know.
Jesus Christ!
Yeah, you will learn Frostbite, and you will think it's the best thing ever.
And on that depressing note, I think we better look at ending because we're coming up to the 1 hour and 30 minutes mark. So
it's 11 o'clock as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and are you working tomorrow? Are you?
I am definitely working tomorrow, and I've got a meeting in the morning as well.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you told me you couldn't record this tomorrow because of that, for that very reason.
Yes, exactly.
So, yep. Sorry.
That's all right.
So
yeah.
Yeah, we'll finish up there, and before we do that, you want to tell us where you can be found?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube at Stories for Games. I think you can just find me from youtube.com/C/Stories for Games, and also you can find me on Twitter at Stories for Games as well. So yeah, either of those. I'm pretty active on Twitter.
He's quite active in my Discord as well.
Yeah.
It's me and him usually.
Don't shut up.
And you guys know where to find me because I'm here and this is my channel. So, yeah, just look out for other videos. And hopefully you got to the end of this one and you enjoyed the chat. And we'll be back for another one at some point. Hopefully a little bit shorter, but we do tend to witter on. So if you like that, tune in for some more. And in the meantime, I'm going to bugger off and hit the hay, and I'm sure Grant's going to do the same.
Yeah, pretty soon.
Cheers. Speak to you in the next one. Bye.
All right. See you later. Bye.